We're thrilled to have you with us today. If we
Thanks,
move on
Jenny.
to, yeah, thanks, Erin. So at Bridge Innovate, we are a global network of business strategists, consultants, and leaders who work alongside your team to create defining moments for your organization. We've had the privilege of working with many large corporates around the world, as well as regional companies and nonprofits. And it's our pleasure to invite you to join us today in our community as a part of our Inspire series. Thank you. So I see Neville's there. Okay, great. So today, Erin Murphy. So she is a global leader, having lots of experience with managing innovation portfolios. And today she's here to share with us a few tips on that topic. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Erin and ask her to share a bit more about her background and what she plans to cover today.
Yep, thanks, Jenny. So I'm just going to share a little bit about what is innovation portfolio management, how that's connected and similar, but yet different from portfolio and project management. So we'll go through a little bit of that information. I've got some questions to get a sense from the audience of what your level of your own experience is, depending on what type of industry and organization you're in. And then there's time for Q&A, certainly at the end. So next slide, and I'll just give a little bit of a brief introduction about myself. So from an education standpoint, my background is finance. And the first few years of my career, I was actually in manufacturing finance for mainly CPG companies such as Kimberly-Clark. And then when I switched into the consumer healthcare space, that was back in 2004, um, sometimes people get healthcare confused with more of like hospital healthcare, but consumer healthcare is really the over-the-counter side of the pharmaceutical industry. And so it's products that I've worked with over the years that many of us can go into grocery stores and our drugstores, Claritin, Afrin, Coppertone, Dr. Scholl's, so many different categories and many different products, which as we go through this conversation, you'll understand why innovation portfolio management became so critical to some of these large organizations. Um, I've been in the consumer healthcare space for almost 13 years. The beauty of that was it was one company, but because of mergers and acquisitions, it was actually three different companies over those 13 years. And I did research and development finance, and then that naturally cascaded into strategic roles within portfolio management and within a chief of staff type role. So excited to hear from the group today what your level of experience again is for all of you. Next slide. So let's start out. So when you hear of strategic innovation portfolio management, if you can just use the chat box, what words come to mind, or one or two words, or how would you define it, or what do you think we're going to be talking about? Complexity. That is true. Innovation makes for tough decisions. Design, project prioritization. Very good. We'll wait just another minute. I'll look and see. All of those, the one thing, the beauty of what I'm going to be talking about for the next 15, 20 minutes around strategic innovation, portfolio, and project management, in my personal opinion, there's really no right or wrong. There are a lot of core foundational principles, and there are many ways you can manage this. And I've seen it done many different ways throughout my career within these different organizations. And so what you really aspire to be is what's going to work for your business, what works for your customers and your consumers, and what's really going to help drive your own business. But just because it might be done one way in an organization doesn't mean it's better or right or wrong compared to a different company, a different business, a different organization. Someone else just said a lot of changes. That is true. So next slide, please, Colin. So I'm going to kind of step back and just say, from a portfolio management perspective, especially when you're working with consumer products and any type of consumer or customer, this is at the early part of the ideation process. And so any business, any industry, services, products, you obviously are wanting to sell something to a customer or to a consumer, and there needs to be a strategy around where you're going to play, what spaces, what products, what services, and what is the strategy around that. So the earliest part of that is really what is portfolio management. So it's a very tactical process, but it's helping achieve your company's, your organization's strategic objectives. And the beauty of the early part of this process, which is this innovation portfolio piece, is that it's really delivering better quality concepts because it enables companies to have this space to play around, do consumer insights, work with design thinking, work with open innovation, and not have it be so formalized from a financial or from a process standpoint, but yet there is some type of foundation and a little bit of governance around it so that the business can learn from what they're working on. So this is at the earliest part of it. Some of the terminology I've seen in the different industries. This could be your idea bank. This could be your active pathway. It could be your pre-gate, so before something is truly formally approved. It enables data-driven decisions, and that's kind of at the core of it. So the portfolio innovation piece is really at that front end. And you do want to have visibility to it, but yet you don't want to over-process or over-govern what's going on in that earliest phase. Next slide. So this is really what I was talking about here with this portfolio management, is that it's this whole front end of ideation and letting the concepts percolate and letting them mature. And then when you get over on the right-hand side, that's more of what project portfolio is about, project management. But the entire process can be looked at holistically and can be managed so that you have full understanding from the front end all the way to the product or the service going out the door. Next slide. So there's a lot of information on here. I'm not going to read it. I'll pause for a minute and let everybody just kind of read it for themselves, and then I'll talk and just kind of touch on the highlights. So as I mentioned earlier, you can have an innovation portfolio and you can have project management. A lot of organizations, again, there's no right or wrong. A lot will just maybe focus on the front end. A lot will focus on the back end. What I've seen as best in class is really if you're looking at the entire spectrum, which is really what we see in the industry is called your pipeline. So again, from a systems, process, valuation, data, all of those pieces of this puzzle, you can manage them holistically, but you can manage them separately as well. So an innovation portfolio, as I mentioned in the earlier part, maybe your attrition rate is going to be greater than that 75% because you're working with your consumer insights and all the different parts of your business to come up with what are the best ideas. So you might have 50, 60 ideas, and that might come down to only 10, and then you continue to filter through that. So it's a longer time frame. It's more exploratory. You're not going to put as much financial rigor around it, but you're going to start building some of that. Versus a project manager and a project portfolio, that's when something is formally approved in a company and there's budgets and there's resources truly put against it, and you want a little more rigor around that. You want project plans. Those project teams will probably meet weekly or at least twice a month to make sure they're on track. And that planning horizon is really kind of tied to the products or the services that you're selling. From my experience, it really was around R&D, research and development, and developing these products. And that development cycle could be anywhere from 12 months to all the way up to 5 or 6 years. So really the point from here is many companies, and really kind of best in class, is that you're managing the entire pipeline, but you know how to kind of manage it fluidly throughout depending on what phase you're in. Next slide. So using the chat again, I think it would be good to get some feedback. Whatever industry, whatever your business is, what is your experience with this capability? Low would be type in a 1, which means it really does not exist or you don't have a lot of experience in this and it's not used to make decisions. 3 would be average, and 5, if you type a 5, would be mature. Okay, I'm seeing quite a few 3s, so that's good. I'll share a little story here while other people are replying. So again, I've seen it in many different industries from my own experience. I was in research and development finance at the time for Merck, and um, we were purchased. Sharon Glau was purchased by Merck, and so there was a significant investment in from a people resource standpoint and from a financial resource. And so I was in R&D finance. I was working with some of the research and development scientists and was with some of our commercial folks. And really, we were at the low. We were at the low end. We were kind of doing it in piecemeal. We were looking at what's in the portfolio, what are the different categories, where should we be starting to play, where should we perhaps cancel ideas, not move them forward. And so we really didn't have that formal capability. And after about a year or two, I recognized, being the finance person, I went to the head of R&D and the head of the finance organization, the CFO, and devised this group and actually created a portfolio management dedicated group. I left the finance organization. I moved into R&D, even though I'm not a scientist. I actually reported to the head of R&D, and we slowly went from the 1 to a 5. And I always like to say, and I used 1 to 5 here, but um, whenever I've worked for these different industries, I've always said, you can be anywhere on a scale of whether it's 1 to 5 or 1 to 10. At Merck, we were probably in the 1 to 2, and we were getting closer to that 3. Once we created that formal capability, I had a team of 4 people. And once we worked on systems and governance and started to really improve, I would say by the end of that 3 to 4 year journey, we were much closer to the end of, on a 1 to 10 scale, we were probably close to an 8 or a 9. And I believe the next slide, Colin, um, gets into exactly what I was talking about. So where do you begin if you are at that low end? Because portfolio management and pipeline management is truly all encompassing. I personally have enjoyed it because it's kind of like you're the hub, or you're the spoke of that wheel, and your information that you're providing back to your organization and your business is only as good as the information that you're working with from your commercial counterparts, your supply chain, your manufacturing, your business development, your finance folks. Every part of the business really plays a critical role in, obviously, what is at the earliest part of our ideas and what are we trying to get to our consumers. And so if your organization is really at that lower end of the spectrum, the beauty is you can create it how you want. So we actually did that at at Merck, as I mentioned. We created this capability. We were probably in the low to average from a maturity standpoint. I actually worked with an outside consulting group for about a month, and we brought them in. We did internal benchmarking. So we did a voice of the customer survey across all those different functions within our large organizations to figure out from the different functions, what did they think about portfolio management and where did we need to improve. And so we had this outside consulting group do the voice of customer survey internally, and we also got external benchmarking, blinded of course, from other companies, and we created a 6 month and a 24-month roadmap on, okay, across these different facets, across governance and processes, across how do you want to manage your gates, across the systems to track all this information and valuation and analytics. Where were we and where did we want to go? So if you're at the low end and you feel your business, this is critical to really driving your business, driving your long range plans, the beauty is you can really create it and you can focus on the areas. Maybe one organization is really strong with their project management and they have a resource tracking tool, but they're not as good on the valuation or the prioritization aspect of things. So that's really the beauty of all of this, is that you can create and analyze what your business needs in order to make better business decisions. Next slide. So here's just an example. Um, Earlier to what I just said, if you're not sure where to begin, you can do a roadmap. You can look at those different facets and decide, what does our business need? Do we need this? Is this a critical capability? I will say I've gone into some companies and it is kind of best in class. I've gone into other organizations and it really didn't have a formal process. And so, but they felt in order to grow, in order to if they're number two in the global environment, they want to be number one. How are we going to get there? So here's just an example. So if your organization feels this is important, but you don't really have a lot of things in place, start simple. Start with some basic KPIs. Start with whatever your innovation funnel and idea pool is. How many do you have? How could you categorize it? What is the value? How do you want to value it? What type of NPV would you like to use? And then you could even start tracking something as simple as speed. How fast from when that idea became an idea and the organization decided, yep, we're moving this one forward, how long did it take you to get that idea, that product, that service to your end consumer or customer? So start simple. And then as you advance, you can get into many different things. This example here is around balance. There's really no right or wrong around balance. You can say, well, are we balanced from the types of innovation? Are we balanced by category? Are we balanced by the timing of our portfolio? So is everything going to launch or go to a consumer in the next year, and then we don't have anything 2 to 3 years down the road? So there's many ways you can look at balance. The picture, the picture down in the bottom right hand is something that was pretty common, certainly in the consumer and the pharma space, where you had your core and your adjacent and your transformational. So that's one way you could look at balance. In the industry I've spent most of my career, for example, core would probably be about 80%, because some of these larger organizations aren't going to take as much risk and they stay within their category space. So it might be like an 80 and 15 and 5. Tech companies, startups, that 80, 15, 5 would probably be core, would probably be more like 60, and adjacent would be maybe 20, 25, and really trying to get into more transformational. So that's, to me, again, the beauty of all this is you have the ability as your company, as your organization, to really, obviously you have your long range plans and you have your strategic goals. This is the core foundational capability to make sure you're creating that and you're staying on track. Next slide, please, Colin. So key takeaways, and then I'd like to open it up if there's any questions. Really, why do you do this? It's about really driving profitability because you're actively choosing to manage your portfolio. Again, some organizations, some businesses might not think this is critical. I've seen it, again, both ways. But really, if you do have a small dedicated group, systems, information, it really helps drive those decisions from a data perspective. It creates a space for open innovation and design thinking and creativity, but yet you have the ability to track that and hang on to that information in a repository. So it's really about maximizing your ROI, creating transparency throughout the whole organization. To me, that was one of the beauties of all of this, is that if everybody knew kind of what was in their portfolio, their pipeline, it's like having a playbook. Everybody in the organization, no matter what function, you all knew what are our priorities. And it creates the buy-in, and it creates that teamwork, and we're working on the same things, and we believe in it because we can have open, honest, transparent discussions about moving projects forward or ideas forward. And we can also have good constructive conversations around maybe something shifted in the marketplace, or maybe something shifted internally in your own company, and you're no longer going to pursue a target market or pursue a particular idea. And you can have those good conversations then, which can be tough, but to maybe decide not to work on something, not to invest in it. And all of this process and this entire front end to when, again, your service or product goes out the door is really about how does this new idea contribute to what we are trying to accomplish? Are we okay with having to possibly make trade-offs? And within a portfolio, it's active, it's alive, and you can continue to analyze it throughout to really help achieve your strategic objectives. So I think, checking the time, yep, I'll pause there and see if there's any questions from the group. And the first one says, how do you set the priorities of the innovations? That's a great question. I will say it's not there. Again, there's not a right or a wrong, and it's not always easy. So from my own personal experience, the businesses played in certain markets and in certain categories. And so then if you really wanted to maybe go into a new target market, or let's say we were in allergy, cough, cold, and digestive health and skincare and foot care, but now we're going to go into um, something more cosmetic, you'd have to have those conversations to see what do you think is your right to win. And so certainly you're working very closely with your commercial um, counterparts to say, do you feel like you can win in this space and in this market and with this category? So that's kind of the first part of it. Once you've all agreed on what is in your innovation portfolio, then you can choose different prioritization methods. We used one at one of the organizations where we had all the information by project, by idea, by category, and we set a ranking value. So it could meet certain points. You could set up a point system, for example. So NPV, so you could have a financial like kind of a scoring system. You could have a financial metric in there. You could have a strategic section in there. You could have technical probability of success. So you could say, are we going to be commercially successful? Are we going to be technically successful? What's the financial valuation? And oh, by the way, we want to say this is really within our strategy. And you can come up with a ranking scoring system, which is pretty advanced. And that's what we did to actually have a portfolio at that time of approved projects of perhaps only 50 projects. And we would get to the point of watching the timing on those. And when a new one came in, we'd have to have that tough conversation of, do we let something finish or do we perhaps have to cancel something? So hopefully that answered the question about how you prioritize. Again, I would say there is no right or wrong. There's different scoring mechanisms out there. And really the key is that the people involved in this process, the business and the organization, are all on the same page about how you want to manage this. Very similar to hopefully our own investments, our own personal investments. Some people might want to play with more risk. Another individual might not. Or the other day I was in Target, as we're all starting to get back out into the world, and I was thinking, I wonder how Target does, portfolio management, because we all know Target has a lot of their own brands, but not everything in their store they choose to have, a Target brand for. So I imagine there's probably a group in managing this of, are we going to play in that space? Are we going to play with this product line? Are we going to have our own brand, or are we going to leave that alone for, the vendors that we're bringing into our business? Okay, someone said, I would imagine this is beneficial as organizational leadership priorities, innovation, and project management approaches into their business model. Is the team leading this a separate entity, or is it integrated across all the org departments? That's a great question. Again, no right or wrong. So this function, I've seen it work best when it is a dedicated group. I've done this now at 3 different large organizations. It's always been a dedicated group, but honestly, it does not matter what function you're necessarily in. I was in research and development. I've seen it where it could be in business development, depending on how large your organization is. I've seen it in finance. One organization, we even had it in a separate group called strategy realization. So it had that and just portfolio management. I think what's more important is that you kind of get an eclectic mix. Just because I'm a finance person does not mean you have to be a finance person to be doing this. You can have engineers, you can have finance people, you can have systems people. It really is kind of almost, in my opinion, better to have that eclectic mix and bring in that different part of the experience of running a business. That's a great question. Can you talk about MVP? Many organizations struggle. Do you mean, are you talking about NPV, Jenny?
So minimal viable product. So I think many times they go through ideation and they'll go through some prototype maturity. And it's sort of like, at what point, what are the indicators that you put in and around MVP and the investment tolerance before return by the organization? Some people feel like if you can't get a return within 12 months or and then they'll kill all these budding ideas. So how does an organization put structure and investment rationalization around MVP, and what competencies or what skills are needed to actually have an effective capability there?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I wish I could like give a 10-word easy answer. Again, I sound a little bit like a broken record. Again, there's no right or wrong. So I hope one key takeaway today for the group was that um, my opinion, I've seen it work best when you manage this entire pipeline, and the one group is managing this entire pipeline, and at the front end with the portfolio innovation piece versus the project piece, they are managed holistically, but yet the details, all the tactical information is managed differently. You don't want to put that kind of financial rigor around something at that front end. So the there I've seen, and we've worked with different um, kind of again scoring methodologies at that earliest part of ideation so that you're not killing something too soon, too fast. And you obviously want more rigor as it's getting closer to the service or the product, going out into the marketplace. When it comes to MVP, it really is about a lot of it is that tolerance for risk within the organization. And from my experience, we kind of had to do it by categories because we were so large and our categories were so different and distinct. As I said, a skincare, foot care, the product development timeline from ideation to launch was 12 to 18 months. So you would expect, quicker, faster, less investment, and you're going to get that return a little bit faster. We dealt with products where we even switched drugs from prescription to over the counter. We did that for internally. We did it for third parties as well. That is a much longer develop. That could be anywhere from 5 to 8 years in the industry I was in. So that investment is significant. The clinical trials, the fees you have to pay to get those products approved. So it's obviously a very different space when you're looking at the time and the investment. And so your return on that is going to be a little slower, and you're also going to have your return on those are going to is you're hoping for a bigger bet, but it's going to take more time perhaps to see that bet. I've even seen some of those switches where they were not. I've seen some very successful. I've seen one, luckily only one, that really was not very successful. The product that was switched did not really resonate with the consumer. It was only out in the marketplace for about 3 years, and it's no longer out there. So Jenny, I know that was a kind of a long-winded answer, but it is, I think it starts at the core that the company, and this is why I kind of hit home on the transparency. When you create this, you have to, there's so many different ways you can do it. Um, but you all have to be kind of unaligned, and this is how we're going to run our business so that you don't keep changing how you're doing it. Otherwise you're going to send an organization into a little bit more of a knee-jerk reaction perhaps. So I think there's certainly professionals like myself who know different ways to do this, and then all get aligned on this is how we're going to do it. Maybe you need to reassess after a year if you're not feeling like you're making the best decisions. Maybe you were applying too much rigor. Maybe you weren't applying enough. Maybe you're calculating your NPV a different way. So there is, again, no right or wrong. I think the core is to, if you feel this is a critical capability for your business, is to get the right people, set it up, work on your maturity and your experience with it, and then continue to analyze, is this working? Is this helping us make the right decisions?
What I really like about what you shared today, Erin, was that you've given us a framework that based on the risk tolerance and sort of the strategy of your organization, you can adapt these frameworks to get your result. And I think that's what's very interesting about when I met you, and to just be amazed with your background is by using data and all the analytics that come from your financial background and innovation portfolio background. It helps executives sort of weigh out those investments and adjust them. And everything I'm hearing you say is that you're constantly looking at the portfolio, managing it, looking at your categories, looking at the market, looking at the risk. It's a very dynamic process. And thank you so much for sharing with us today. I know there's a lot to cover, and you've given us some wonderful tips and guidance around looking at that foundation of building that capability. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
And
go
I
ahead.
didn't say it at the beginning, but I hope everyone did have a really nice long Memorial Day weekend. And I hope everyone stays safe throughout hopefully what is nearing the end of a lot of this pandemic environment that we're in.
Yeah, absolutely. I could join you on those good wishes. And as we wrap up today, just want to invite you to help us thank Erin. You can put that in the chat. I see Mary's already done that. And then also to share with you that we have a number of other webinars coming up that may pique your interest. Go into thebridgeinnovate.com under our studio to look at the events coming up and to sign on. We've got diversity and inclusion from Lucia Cook from Shaw Industries coming up later this week. And then also how Google is helping people connect on June 2nd, looking at designers, healthcare, and sustainability, how those things merge, coming in from the ISDNA conference. And then the future of work, are we ready? A great webinar coming up as well later in June. So thank you guys so much. We hope to see you again on another one of our Inspire webinar series.